Hello, my name is Stephanie Owen Reeder and I'm a children's author. Today I'm going to give you a little bit of background to my picture book, Trouble in the Surf, illustrated by Briony Stewart. So every book tells a story, but there's also a story about how the book was made. So I'm going to tell you about where the inspiration came from, how I did the research for this book because it's based on a true historical story, and all the wonderful things that I discovered along the way as I was being what I like to call a history detective. Okay, so the story of Trouble in the Surf is the story of 9-year-old boys, Charlie Smith and Rupert Swallow, who in 1907 went to Bondi Beach in Sydney to go for a swim. And they charged straight into the surf. They didn't check to see that it was safe. And unfortunately, they got caught in the Bondi Rip and had to be saved. Now, how did this story start? Well, it began in 2016 when I was in Sydney for the Children's Book Council of Australia Book of the Year Awards, which my book, Lenny the Legend, won the Eve Powell Award for Information Books. And one of the other winners was the wonderful Robert Ingpen, one of Australia's foremost illustrators of children's books. And Robert has illustrated lots of classic children's books like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and as you can see, he does the most glorious illustrations. And we were chatting after the award ceremony, and he said to me, I think you should write a book about lifesavers. Now that resonated with me because my father was a member of the Life Saving Club for many, many years, and he was a lifesaver at North Stane Life Saving Club in Sydney near Manly Beach, and my parents actually met there at the Life Saving Club. And he was also at Avalon Beach and at Whale Beach. And I grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney, and so I spent a lot of time in the surf as a child. So the idea of writing a book about lifesavers and about the beach really appealed to me. So when I came back to Canberra, which sadly has no beaches, I did some research. And the first place I went, trying to find a story about lifesavers that I could retell for Australian children. So the first place I went to is the very wonderful Trove. Now, Trove is literally a treasure trove of information for anybody doing any sort of research, but especially historical research. It's set up by the National Library of Australia, and they have things like digitised newspapers that you can search from back to the 1800s. It also has old photographs and references to books and all sorts of things that you can search to find out about and to be a history detective and find the stories you're looking for. So I did a very simple search. I put in words like beach and a child and hero, and one of the stories that I came up with was the story of 9-year-old boys Charlie Smith and Rupert Swallow, who in 1907 were saved from the surf by the surf bathers at Bondi Beach. This is before, only just before, but before the official Life Saving Club was set up. And an amazing lady called Sadie Sweeney, and I always love the names that you find when you start searching for historical things. So we've got Rupert Swallow and Sadie Sweeney, and she was the one who actually saved Charlie Smith's life when he nearly drowned. He was unconscious when the surf bathers pulled him from the water. But so I thought, oh, this is a good one, and it'll make a great picture book because we've got all the wonderful old outfits that they used to wear, the neck-to-knee bathing costumes. And as you can see, a lot of the ladies went fully clothed to go to the beach, as you do. And so I started doing some deeper research, and I made a wonderful discovery. I discovered that Charlie Smith was actually Charles Kingsford Smith. And Charles Kingsford Smith is a famous Australian aviator. And he went on after he was saved from the surf. So the history could have been quite different if Sadie Sweeney and the surf bathers hadn't been there. But Charles Kingsford Smith went on to become a very famous pilot and aviator. He ended up on Australia's $20 note. And, of course, Sydney Airport is named after him. There's also been films and musicals about him. So he became a very famous person. So it was very lucky that he was saved from the surf on that fateful day. So that made me very, very interested in the story. And so I not only was doing research on surf lifesavers, but also on Charles Kingsford Smith, and on Bondi Beach. And one of the ways that I do my research is a lot of it is looking at pictures, because you get a lot of information about what people looked like and how they wore their hair and what clothes they wore, and what things they ate. And there's so much information in a picture. And Trove is one of the great places to find the old pictures. And quite a few of my stories that I've written over the years have been based, on family stories from my personal history. And that's something that you can do too. You can ask your parents, ask your grandparents, and find out what the family stories are. Who's had a close shave? Who met somebody really important or famous? Who did something really incredible in your family? Because after all the historical stories that I write about young people are just family stories. But they've ended up in the paper because that child did something amazing or went on to become someone really famous. So that's how I find my stories in Trove. And just to show you, these are two members of my family. This is my grandmother and my grandfather on my father's side, and Lillian Owen. And this is where there's connections between my family story and the family story of Charles Kingsford Smith, because my grandmother was a bathing beauty in the 1920s, and she's actually in books on the history of Manly. So she features photos of her in her bathing costume, feature in books like this on the history of Manly. And she was judged to be Sydney's surf girl by Norman Lindsay, the artist, who was also the author and illustrator of a very famous Australian children's book, which is called The Magic Pudding. So connections within connections. Then my grandfather was a jazz musician in the 1920s, and just by chance he had actually met Charles Kingsford Smith, and Grandpa, he played the xylophone and percussion instruments including drums, and Charles Kingsford Smith actually signed his drum kit. I wish we still had it. Unfortunately we don't. But so, more connections within connections. And that's what history's all about, isn't it? It's all a story with interconnections. And so you never know what you might find once you start looking into your family history. Now, the next thing that I did was put the story to my publisher. She thought it was a great idea, luckily. And she selected Briony Stewart to do the illustrations. And because I collect a lot of images when I'm doing my research for writing a book, I sent images to Briony for her to use as reference images for drawing her pictures. And this is something else that you can do. Here's one of the images that I sent to her. It's a picture that I found on the National Library's collection. And this is actually a group of ladies in 1908 on the beach at Collaroy in Sydney. in their lovely neck-to-knee bathing costumes. And you can see the wonderful imagery that Briony created. So you could do that too. Find some black and white images, trace them or copy them, and bring them to life by painting them or using textures to colour them in, and creating your own images of life in a bygone era. Now, as I said before, one of the wonderful things about this story that I discovered, Trouble in the Surf, is that it has not one, not two, but three Australian icons in it. So we've got Charles Kingsford Smith, the aviator, who, you know, is our airport, Sydney Airport, is named after. We've got Bondi Beach, and everybody knows about Bondi Beach. And we've also got the lifesavers, and Australian lifesavers are amazing volunteer lifesavers who have saved thousands of lives since they first started in the early 1900s. And I just want to show you a picture. It's quite different to what they look like today. This is from March 1907, and this is the Bondi Surf Bathers Life Saving Club. And you can see that just like the pictures in Trouble in the Surf, a lot of these gentlemen have very magnificent moustaches and some rather weird bathing costumes. So that just gives you a few ideas of how you can look for stories in historical stories, but based on your family. And also I've got some other ideas for you to use on my website, and this is where you can find them at stephanieowenreeder.com. So I hope you get to play historical detective and that you enjoy doing it as much as I do.